Hello and welcome to this course about how to keep your teen happy and healthy online. During the following few minutes, we will be thinking about the simple things that you can do alongside your teen to ensure that they are thriving online as well as offline. We'll be thinking about some of the common pitfalls and the things that might be worrying you, and we'll also be thinking about some of the bonuses and the pluses about life online that we might not have previously considered. I hope that you'll find it interesting. Use the ideas in whatever way feels best for you and your teen. And remember, it always works best when we keep on talking to each other and we remain open and flexible in our point of view. The first piece of advice I'm going to give you is to show an interest in the life of your teen online. Many young people now don't make that kind of online-offline distinction that we might do in that slightly older generation. We have our real life friends and then we might have some people that we connect with online. Young people tend to have a much more fluid view of this, and they have many relationships which they consider to be good, genuine, proper friendships with people they might never have met, that might live in a completely different country with completely different circumstances, but where perhaps our young person, our teenager, has found something that connected them to that person. We need not to be dismissive of that, but instead to show an interest in what they're doing online and help them to help us to understand what it is that is happening in their online life. So we should show as much interest in their life online as we show in their life offline. If your teen has friends in real life, then you'd want to know a bit about them, about the things that your child is getting up to with those young people and the things that make them happy and how they're spending their time. Be as curious about their online friendships. It's likely that your teen is spending a lot of time online, and this is a really significant part of their life and one that we need to know a bit more about, and which it will feel good to them if you show an interest in what's going on for them there. I often use the phrase invite them to invite you in. And this is about actually being curious and asking questions to your teen that show them, I'm interested to know more about this. Maybe it's not my thing. Maybe I don't feel completely comfortable here, but it matters to you and therefore it matters to me. Tell me about it. And this is where we do things like use our open questions and just be really curious. Ask every question we have so that our teen can begin to tell us a little bit about their world. This only works if you're actually genuinely interested. So this is about being fully there, really listening and asking all the questions that you might have. Actually, we generally are quite curious. It usually is a bit of a puzzle to us what our youngsters are getting up to online, and it can be baffling some of the things that they find amusing ways to spend their time. Be curious, and rather than being judgmental, which can sometimes happen, wonder aloud about what is it they're getting up to? Why is this fun for them? How does that work? When we ask them to explain to us what's going on, sometimes they'll think that we're not really that interested, or they might be dismissive and busy with other things. But if you show a genuine and consistent curiosity, you will likely find that your teen will quite happily begin to explain to you more about their life online, more about those things, those places, those people that really matter to them. And if you don't understand what's going on online, it's really hard to do the appropriate things that you need to as a parent or a carer to keep your child safe. So maybe you've got worries in your mind about TikTok. Is that safe for your child? Ask them to tell you about it. Understand how they're using it. Think about what's going on for their friends there. Ask them about their worries and their concerns, but also be curious about the things that they find good about it. The other thing I must touch on here is gaming. I think gaming is a hugely misunderstood element of teenagers' life online. So gaming is something that we will often think is a waste of time, not a good way for young people to be wasting their time away on spending hours in their room gaming. When actually, if you stop and you think about it with a young person, you explore with them what's in it for them, why do they like gaming so much, we begin to understand how rich it can be. That doesn't mean it all is, but actually some gaming is equivalent to maybe reading a novel. You are in a world where there's all sorts of different things that can happen, but unlike a novel, actually, you get to choose what happens next. My brother, who loves to game, once explained to me that he loved gaming because it was like those books that I loved as a child, Choose Your Own Adventure, where the ends were multiple and you got to decide at different points what you did next. I loved those books, and he loves gaming for that same reason. He's in a novel, in a whole world that's now filmed beautifully, often as good as many films, and yet he gets to pick what happens next. He's in control, and he loves that. And when I began to really understand that, I began to reassess my view of gaming, and it's made me much more curious. So maybe be curious about what your teen is happening in their online world too. The other thing about gaming is it can be really important for social connection as well. Many young people aren't just gaming, they're also connecting and talking to others. And of course, this can come with some risk. We need to understand, particularly for younger children, who they're talking to, what's going on there, what are the safeguards in place, do they know how to keep themselves safe? So it's important we understand that. However, for many of them, particularly over the pandemic, this has been a way they can actually connect with people when they might not be able to do that in flesh and blood. Finally, the online world is big, and whoever you are, whatever your passions, your skills, your interests are, you're going to find your tribe online if you look for them in the right places. And that's really exciting, particularly if you live somewhere where perhaps it's a bit rural or it's a certain kind of community. You might have a teen who doesn't really feel like they found their place, and online suddenly they might find that there are people like them out there. I've seen this happen really powerfully with children who were transgender, or who had questions about their sexuality, or who just had a relatively discrete set of interests or skills, or a hobby that was a little bit unusual. When you go online, you've got the whole world to choose from. Offline, we might only have access to the people who are in our school or college or our small local community. Online, the world is our oyster. So you might think with your teen about how they can use the online world to find their tribe. It can be such a powerful thing to do. The next idea that I'm going to share with you is about setting ground rules together with your child or young person. So this is about, instead of you as the parent or carer telling them what the rules are, this is about working together as a family and thinking collaboratively about what rules, guidelines, ground rules might work for you all as a family. Now, the reason why I think that this is important is because it really opens up a really interesting and important dialogue about what life online should look like. It makes us question ourselves as role models and think about what our guidelines and guiding rules should be for ourselves online as well. It's very easy to set these rules, but can be quite difficult to follow them. Have you ever found that you set one rule for your child and then you find that you're not actually adhering to that rule yourself? We particularly find this with things like phone use. We might be telling our children to put their screens away, and yet we find always that we've got ours in front of us. We all do it. It's really, really hard. But when we work together and we hold ourselves to account and we try to be a good role model and we bring our team to the table at these discussions, that's really empowering for them. And also when they feel that they're part of making these decisions together with us, they are much more likely to help us, to help them, to make good, sustainable boundaries and to put them in place. But they're also a lot more motivated to try and stick within those parameters that we've set together. You won't always agree with your teen about what those rules and those guidelines should be, and often there's going to be a bit of a meeting in the middle here. But the thing is that what you'll find is if you have these conversations at a time of relative calm, when we're away from the screens, not the moment when you've just lost your rag because your teen's just spent their 19th hour of the day on YouTube, but at a time of calm, we have these discussions, we will often find that actually our children's thinking is more aligned with ours on this than we might think. and that when we have a good, healthy discussion about it, you'll often find that they would quite like to reduce their screen time, or they like the idea of connecting more offline as well as online, or there's all different things here. So have the discussion. Instead of dictating to, we work with them. We set these ground rules together. Hold yourself to account. Think, what are your rules about your life online? And if you don't have any, what could and should they be? Would you like your teen to copy the way that you conduct yourself online? And if not, what do you think you'd like to change, and what might be small steps that you can take to change that? When there are different points of view here, and there will be sometimes, then think about everybody's point of view in turn. We try not to judge, we try to listen, but then think carefully about the pros and cons of different points of view. These kinds of discussions as a family are so powerful for young people. We can role model a lot here about turn taking in discussion and sharing opinions in a powerful, assertive but respectful way, and they can learn how to argue their case really well. And it's important that sometimes that we do meet them in the middle here rather than just telling them what to do. That's really empowering, and it really does build trust between adult and child. What we sometimes find is if we're always just telling them what to do, particularly if we haven't taken time to listen to their point of view and try to accommodate it somewhat, that we find sometimes they will just sneak and they will do what they want to do anyway, but they no longer involve us in those conversations. That can leave them really vulnerable, because it means if something goes wrong at a time, for example, when they shouldn't have been online, or perhaps using a service that you've told them they're not allowed to use, it's very, very difficult for them to ask for your help there. So thinking really open-mindedly, if we can, together about what those rules should be, and then trying to help them understand the balance between wanting to keep them safe and healthy, but also wanting to meet their needs and their wants and their wishes, is a really, really healthy way of looking at it as a family. The more that you do this, the more that you'll find that your teenager is able to take on more responsibility, and that you can begin to trust them a little bit more to make decisions and take appropriate action for themselves. That's a really important part of growing up. If we don't begin to have these conversations in the early teenage years, then we find that suddenly our young people are ready to fly the nest and they've got to make all the decisions, and they're completely responsible for themselves, having had quite a tightly structured and looked after environment before. That can be quite scary for them and for us. Be sure when your teen makes good decisions that you recognise that, celebrate those moments and tell them well done. They need to know that you're proud of them for the decisions they're making and the way in which they're living their life offline and online. They won't get it right all the time. When things go wrong, let's try and be calm and curious and work with them to ensure that we can help them to get things back on track. We want to make sure that that dialogue remains open, that they can come and ask us if they need their help. Try to give them enough space to make good decisions for themselves. Praise them when they do that. But if things go wrong, they need to know that they've got your support if they need it. A really interesting starting point for this discussion can be, what would your teen suggest for you in terms of ground rules? Do you think they would think that you should use your phone differently? Would they have ideas about your screen time or what you're doing in the run up to bedtime? What would they suggest to you? That can be such an interesting way in and can really open up the discussion here. So you might be thinking together about things like screen time, about when we are and aren't allowed to use our phones or devices, and about different places that we do or don't go online. We might also think about how we conduct ourselves online more generally, about respectful, meaningful conversations that we might want to have and ways that we would avoid as well. I talked a little bit before about how we can be a role model to our child online, and I just want us to think a little bit more about that here. This is really, really important, because what we find is that children and young people learn more from what they see the trusted adults around them do than from what we ever try to teach them. And this is really important to remember. So we can tell them till we're blue in the face about what they should and shouldn't be doing, but the way they really learn is by copying what we do. So let's give them something really great to imitate. Just take notice over the next few days about your life online and think about whether you would be happy for your teen to conduct themselves this way. Think about how you feel when you're online. Think about the things that you do, the places that you go. Think about when you're online and whether you feel that would be appropriate for your teen as well. Think about how you are made to feel by others and how you talk to others online. There'll be some bits which you're really proud of how you conduct yourself online and you'd love your teen to copy, and that's great. There might be other elements where you think, that's not quite healthy or that's not making me happy, and there might be some areas where we might be a bit more curious here. Just have a little bit of a think about that and whether there are any areas that you maybe would want to change. You can be curious aloud about this with your teen and talk to them about perhaps, you might say, I've been thinking about reducing my screen time before bed. I've been finding it difficult to get to sleep and I've read that it's better to put your phone away for an hour before bed. What do you think about that? And we can be curious together. We can admit that sometimes we don't get it right, or that we're finding it really hard to change things as well. These really open, honest discussions can really help our teens. And when they see the process that we go through when we want to make a change, and that's not always easy, but we persevere, that can be really motivating and again, great role modelling for them too. Again, if you're brave enough to do so, asking your teen to feed back to you about their perception of your life online can be really helpful. We found in our family that when we first talked to our children about this, then they talked about our phone use at meal times. And I have to be honest, it wasn't even really something I was aware of. But as soon as I became aware of it from my children, then I held myself to account on a different level. And it's really had a huge impact on the quality of discussions that we're able to have at meal times, which is fantastic news. And it has meant that as my children have got older, there's no way that they would consider bringing a device to the table. It just wouldn't be done. And yet I know that in many other families, and probably in mine, if the children hadn't intervened at that stage, this would be considered a perfectly normal and acceptable thing. But for our family, and all families are different, having those screen-free meal times where we can talk to each other and really connect makes a really big difference. But like I say, it was the children that really pushed for that. And now they're getting older, they're having to live by those same rules as well. Finally, it can be helpful to have a think about what other role models there are in your child's life online. So it's important that you are a good role model to your children if you can be, but also consider what other trusted adults are there who are influencing the decisions that they're making and the actions that they're taking. Are there people there who you think are great role models? Are there people there who you think are great role models, and we might talk about what they're doing well and what we might aspire to? But then equally, are there people where perhaps we question if this is exactly what we would hope our teen to emulate? And if so, can we explore that in a non-judgmental but really curious way with our teen and begin to have some discussions opening up there? The next idea I'm going to share with you is about how we can create a no-blame culture when it comes to life online. Now, this really matters because things will go wrong. Things will go wrong. And what we need is that when things go wrong, whether that's in a little way or a big way, that our teens know that they can come to us for help. This is a discussion worth having again and again and again. Your child needs to know that there's nothing that they can do that you would not be prepared to help them with, because otherwise they may not feel they can come to you if things get really sticky, and occasionally they do. They need to know that maybe you might be angry or upset in the first instance, but then the support would kick in and you would help them. They need to know this, and they need to hear it again and again and again and again and again. And the way that we do this is partly by telling them repeatedly, but also by showing them. By being curious when little things go wrong, by listening and trying not to overreact, but rather try and stay calm and curious and cool if things go a little bit wrong for them. When we respond in that way to the smaller things, then it builds that trust, and it means that if something goes catastrophically awful, that hopefully they would come to you and ask for your help. You can build this trust with your child right from a really early age through your interactions with them about all sorts of different problems and issues that might arise. Just trying generally to be the adult that your child needs in response to any kind of challenge can be super helpful. If we're able to be curious, if we're able to listen, if we're able to be empathetic, and try to take a problem solving rather than a blaming type approach to problems and issues, that is optimal. We won't be able to do it all the time, we're not superhuman, but just thinking a little bit about the kinds of responses that we give when faced with challenge and adversity, either from our child or from other things in life, then that begins to set the tone for if there were to be any issues. If things do go wrong and your child comes to you for your help, the kind of gut reaction we tend to have is to try and fix it. We want to make it all okay with their parent or their carer, and we want to fix this. If you can, it's really important to try and resist the urge to do that, to tell them what to do, to make it right. That's not generally what they want from you. What they normally want from you is for you to listen, for you to help them, but not for you to fix this problem for them, and nor is that healthy. Ideally, teenagers, they're getting to a point where they're becoming more independent, they're getting ready to face the world on their own. We need to build up their capacity to cope and thrive. This doesn't mean that we leave them completely on their own to deal with all the problems, but rather that if they present us with issues online or offline, to be honest, that we don't fix them, but rather we listen, we're curious, we reflect back to them what's going on, and then we begin to explore with them what they think could happen next. We might ask, is there anything I can do to help you? And if they're really struggling with it, we might begin to make some suggestions, begin to open up that line of inquiry of different things that might happen next. But really good if we're able to create an environment in which we brainstorm with our child and they're able to come up with some suggestions. Try to hear them out if they have ideas about things that may help. Sometimes their suggestions will not be good, or you will have reasons for thinking that they won't work, but we don't always know the answers, so let's be curious and explore it together. If your child does come up with a suggested solution that you think is unrealistic or unlikely to work, then just think about how you respond to that. Try to respond empathetically, calmly, curiously, kindly, rather than just shutting them down. We need them to feel heard, and then they're much more likely to come to us with other problems in the future. Finally, it can be really helpful to navigate when things go wrong by addressing learning moments. So there might be moments when they tell you about something that went wrong for a friend, or maybe there's something that's in the media about an incident that has happened for a child online. You can use these moments to begin to explore things like, how do you think that child felt? Or what do you think they could have done differently? Or what do we think might have helped in this circumstance? Who could they have asked to help them? All these kinds of questions. And again, you don't need to know the answers here. It's about beginning to ask the questions, opening up the conversation and exploring different possibilities with your child. Remembering always that what we're looking to do here is to reconfirm again and again and again with our child so that they know they have our unconditional care and support no matter what goes wrong, that they can come to us with their problems and we'll help them. And that sometimes we don't know the answers either, but we will absolutely walk with them while we look together for solutions. Next, we're going to think about how you can talk to your teen about what good relationships online look like. We talked right back at the top about how teens don't necessarily differentiate between online and offline in the same way that we do. And so we can be thinking about healthy relationships in the round. What does a good relationship look like? When are things going toxic? What should we do if there's a problem? How should we treat our friends? How should we expect them to treat us? What are the warning signs that things aren't okay here? All these kinds of questions are super helpful, and we can explore with our teen both what that looks like online and offline, as I say. Sometimes these discussions are easier when you look through the lens of a friend. So rather than saying, when would you be worried about yourself, you might say to your teen, what would cause you concern about, if Emily was in a relationship online, what things would be warning bells for you? Or what do you think would be good for her in that circumstance? When we explore it through the eyes of a friend, then that kind of removes a layer of judgment and jeopardy and can make it a little bit easier for our teen to talk to us. Again, curiosity is our friend here, and we might explore with our teen our own experiences or their own experiences of good and less good relationships, both online and offline. We learn so much just from being curious and exploring together. Think too with your child about what should be their next steps if they have an online friend and they've decided they want to take that relationship offline. Think carefully about what the next steps there should be in order to keep them safe. Our gut reaction is often, no, we must never do this. But actually, again, we need to create that environment that our child feels they can talk to us about it so we can help to keep them safe. If we say this is a categoric no, then that makes it much more likely that our teen will go and make these meetings and have these relationships even without telling us. And that puts them in much, much more jeopardy than if they were to tell us that this were happening and we could think about how to potentially safeguard that. Think with your teen about the things that they need to check, how they would do this in a safe and good way, and what they might be able to do if a friend were in this situation too. A really interesting question that you can explore with your team, which is a great topic for debate and discussion, is, are online friendships and offline friendships different? Is one better than the other? And should all cross the divide? So should every offline friend become your online friend and vice versa? It's a really interesting thing to explore, and you'll find lots of different opinions from different young people, but a really fascinating one to really think about. It helps us to really dig into the nature of what is friendship, what are relationships, and what really matters to us when it comes to those things. Of course, during the course of the pandemic, we've all had to rethink what friendship really means and look like. So many of us have had relationships that have gone almost entirely virtual, and we've managed somehow in many cases. So you're now in a much better situation to empathise with your teen than you might ever have been before about what online relationships look like. But yeah, I would really advise, explore that idea. Do relationships, are they better online or offline? Should we always cross that divide? And why or why not? Next, a super practical idea that I have really benefited from personally, and this is about cleansing your timeline. So have a think about your own timelines on social media and how they make you feel. Just notice that over the next couple of days. Do all the accounts that you follow inspire you, make you feel happy, make you feel good about yourselves, make you enjoy your life more? If not, why not? What are they doing instead? Maybe you're falling into that pit of kind of compare and despair that so many of us do, where we're looking at our life compared to others. Or maybe you are finding that you're bored by the content that other people are sharing, or maybe they're just not your kind of people anymore. Perhaps you've changed and they haven't, or vice versa. But just have a think about how you feel in response to these people who you've chosen to have in your timeline. And remember, it's your timeline. You get to choose who's on there. So you can have a think about this with your teen as well. Talk to each other about the people and the accounts that really inspire you, the ones that you really enjoy following, and try and think what it is about them that you really, really like. On the other hand, have a think about whether there are any accounts or people that really do not fill you with joy anymore. And think about whether you might take the brave step to remove those people from your timeline. So in our family, we're a big fan of the KonMari method. So KonMari is a Japanese decluttering expert, and she tells us that we should only keep the things that spark joy. And she's talking about possessions, but I think that this is equally applicable when it comes to the people in our timeline. So if we're following an account and it makes us feel bad about ourselves, or it doesn't spark a lot of joy, we should let them go. Explore with your teenager the different mechanisms there are for stopping ourselves from seeing other people's online content. You might think about the difference between blocking and muting, for example. If you're in a WhatsApp group and you remove yourself, everybody knows that you've done that, and your teen might not feel happy about that, but maybe they can mute the group for a while and no one will really notice. So just have a think with them about the different mechanisms here and why we might use them, and what benefit there is to sometimes tuning out of the stuff that is incoming that doesn't make us feel good. Remember that things change, so an account that might have been sparking joy for you or them may not do so in the future, and vice versa. It's possible that things that you didn't used to like to follow now become something of great interest or inspiration. So revisit this often, because things change and we change. And also, it sounds a lot, I think, here I'm talking about the negatives and we're removing the people that don't inspire us, but a really great topic of conversation with your teen can be, what are your favourite accounts that you follow and why? What is it that you really like about them? I learned a lot from one of my daughters recently. She likes to watch ASMR videos, so these are often people making, well, I'm curious about it, it doesn't make sense to me, but she watches videos of people making like loud eating sounds or playing with sand in a loud way, or lots of kind of sound, intense sound videos, which is kind of my idea of hell, but I'm curious about it. And she was telling me the other day about a channel she follows called Flower ASMR, and there's loads of ASMR channels, and I said, but why Flower ASMR? And she told me all about exactly why she really liked this particular YouTube channel and the girl who runs it and what it was that she liked about it. And even though I still don't get it, I now understand a bit more about my daughter's motivations and why this thing that to me felt like kind of a waste of her time actually really does bring her some happiness, some joy, some value. Think with your teen about the stories that people choose to tell about themselves. Every person curates their own story online. We decide who we want to be. We choose what photos we share, what stories we tell. And this is really fascinating when we stop and we think about it. Think with your child about, why do people choose this picture, this filter, this tagline? Why are people sharing this particular story? We used to think about this more in terms of brands, and we would think, why have they put this filter on? Why have they chosen this location to show this aspirational product? And we would be curious and try to be critical in our consumption. We now need to take all those ideas and apply it to everybody in our timeline, just regular people like you and me. Everyone is choosing every day, every minute of every day, what story they want to tell. A really helpful question here is, what do they want me to think and why? Just like we might wonder if we were looking at a branded account, wonder that about individuals too. Also, it can be really interesting to think about the people behind the keyboards. Who are they really? Do we really know them? And again, this is interesting when it comes to that question around the online, offline. It'd be really interesting to talk to your teen about if there are people that they knew online before they met them offline. Were they how they expected? Had they represented themselves accurately? In what way were they different? It's really fascinating. Also, you can think with your teen about, who are they online? Maybe you can be brave enough to think about, who are you online and how do you choose to represent yourself? You can do things quite practically, like think with your teen about their Instagram timeline and look there and look at what they're sharing, but also look at what other people are sharing and just be curious and say, I wonder why. It's really just all about wondering, and the more that we can be curious and explore it without judgment, but with loads of curiosity and compassion, then we can have these really good and interesting conversations with our child. Also helpful in these moments to just reflect again on that idea of compare and despair and doom scrolling, and how we're constantly kind of comparing ourselves to other people. And a really helpful thing I find here is to remind ourselves that we know about our own lives, warts and all, but we are comparing ourselves to other people's highlights. So other people are curating a story, they're choosing the best bits to share with us, and we are comparing that highlight reel of that other person with our outtakes, our bloopers. One really important thing to think about when we're trying to keep our children happy online is how do we respond to meanness? There is meanness and hatred and horridness in the world, whether we're online or offline. And in particular, we find that in the online world, when people are hiding behind a screen and a keyboard, they can be pretty vicious sometimes. Think with your child about how they should respond to the meanness of others. Again, sometimes it can help to step into the shoes of a friend or someone else and think about how they might respond in that situation. But remember, this is a two-way thing, and it can be super easy for children to jump on the bandwagon with other kids and be unkind to someone else when they're hidden behind that screen and that keyboard. It's much easier to be mean to someone online when you can't see their actual reactions and tears on their face, and yeah, sometimes things can go nasty quite quickly. So we need to think about this from 2 points of view. So that's how would we respond? What could we do to protect ourselves or get the support we needed if we were to experience that unkindness? Who could we ask for help here? But also we need to be mindful that sometimes our child might be the perpetrator here without really meaning to. So we just need to help them to really consider the fact that it's real people that they're talking to and about when they're online. If people are being unkind, my great rule of thumb in life is always don't feed the trolls. So there's always going to be online some people who are just picking a fight. They're looking to make things feel uncomfortable and they want to provoke a reaction. Usually the best way to make them go away, do not respond. In particular, if you've got someone with a much smaller account who's attacking you and you've got a larger account, when you begin to respond, it really adds fuel to the fire. And just a small note here, if you happen to have a child who's got a really good following online or a really loyal following, even if it's small, if they do start to respond to someone who's kind of trolling them and being mean, what they'll often find is that people around them will jump on and be unkind in return to the person who started the meanness. And actually, this is not really a great thing, because the person who's trolling, often there's stuff going on for them and this can be really difficult and unpleasant for them. It's certainly something I have to be super mindful of online. I try just to ignore the haters if they come, and not to name and shame them, because I don't think it does anybody any good, even though it would maybe sometimes feel quite satisfying to see them taken down by someone else. But this is just an important thing just to reflect on, really, that hurt people hurt people. So when someone is hurting, sometimes the way that displays is that they become unkind to others. And so when we are experiencing unkindness from others, just tapping into and understanding what might be the genesis of that can be a really helpful touch point for us. That doesn't make it okay, but it can help us perhaps to understand a little bit about what might be going on for them. One thing that I've always taught my children, and which I think is a really good rule of thumb, is that we should collect the positives that people say about us. So I literally keep mine in a file online of nice things people have said. When people say really nice things, when they pay really meaningful compliments to me, then I try to keep them. And they're my kind of evidence for a bad day that I'm a good person and that people like what I'm doing and it's worthwhile. But when people are unkind, when they're just vicious, I delete it. And that's taken me a long time to learn, and it's something I've tried to teach my children from really early on. And again, as you begin to build a following and an audience, then every now and then there will be haters there. Not necessarily for any reason you can put your finger on, but because this just happens. And particularly if you've got low self-esteem, then you can find yourself really tuning hard into those small negatives and forgetting these huge number of positives. So keep the positives, delete the negatives. I think it can be helpful sometimes. If there's constructive criticism there, we might learn from it. But to be honest, almost universally, people are either kind and positive or just downright horrible. There's not usually a huge amount in between. It does us no good to dwell on those negative things that people are saying, particularly if they're unfounded. So just delete them and think about utilising the mute function. And if people are particularly unkind or it's malicious in any way, then we should use the report function as well and not feel ashamed or scared of doing that. You might explore with your child the difference between unkindness and constructive criticism, and that can open up a really interesting discussion. And think with your child, how would they respond if they were to receive stuff that felt hurtful to them? Who would they talk to? Where would they go? What would they do about it? Think too about the actions that they might take if they had something unkind they wanted to say to someone. My grandma always taught me, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. What do you think about that? So the next idea about keeping your teen happy and healthy online I'm going to share is kind of a cheat, because it's get offline. And this, I think, really matters because we live so much of our lives online now, and particularly since the pandemic, that it can be really easy to forget that there's a whole world out there. And we can all be guilty of this, not just our teens, but our teens in particular often have a very thriving life online. And that's great, and there are lots of benefits there, and we try not to be dismissive but rather be curious about that. However, there is a world, and we need to think about how we can help our teen to forge meaningful connections, have interactions, get outside, enjoy nature, and all those things as well. Again, it's really good if we can bring our teen along for the ride here and help them to understand that this is something they might want to do. It might be something they find challenging, and you might ask if there are things you can do to help with this. Routine is your friend here, so building in screen-free time each day or week can be super helpful, and doing that at the same time, having a bit of a plan of nice things that you might do instead, can be a really good thing. A helpful thing here can be that if you know other families with children who are the same age and friends of your child, to talk with each other about whether you might have breaks that you all take at the same time from online, so that your teen doesn't feel like they're missing out on stuff. And again, if there are some sort of rules or guidelines which are familiar and similar between many different families, then it's much easier for your teen to adhere, and they're less likely to kick up a fuss. It can be really challenging if you're the one whose family has said you're not allowed to be online between 6 and 8 in the evening and everyone else is allowed to be there. You'd feel like you were missing out, you'd feel like you had the strictest parents, even if they were doing it from a position of love and care. So have a think about your teen's perception on this, have a think with other families about whether there can be any collaboration here and any kind of guidance that you might all somewhat agree on, and think with your teen about what feels happy and healthy for them and how you can support them to make small changes that they might be up for making. Think with your teen about what is a realistic aim for amount of time that is spent offline each day, each week, and again, think about yourself. Are you taking these regular breaks that you would recommend for your teen? Do you have significant periods when you're offline and maybe even connecting with nature and so on? Or is this something that you struggle with too? Many of us do really struggle with it, and if that's the case for you, then maybe, again, think with your teen about how you can make some changes together. Okay, the final idea that I want to share with you is to think about what can possibly go wrong. To get it all out of your head and write it down or communicate it with someone. Think about your worst possible fears for your child online, and imagine what you would do if that happens and what you can do in terms of taking steps to try to prevent that from happening. When we actually verbalize or otherwise make known our worries, then we're in a position where we're much more able to name them. No, much more able to tame them. When we verbalise or otherwise make known aloud our worries, then we're in a position where we're much more able to tame them. So I teach children from very tiny that if you name it, you can tame it. And I think that is true here as well. Sometimes these are just kind of big worries that are kind of floating around our head and we haven't captured them and pinned them down. Once we pin them down, we can figure out how to overcome them. And sometimes when we pin them down, we realise that the things that we're worrying about are so unlikely that maybe we should spend a bit less time worrying about them. So name those fears and think about steps that you can take to prevent or manage them. But also think about what's the best that could happen. What are the greatest things that could happen in your child's life online? Maybe they meet the best friend of their life. Maybe they find a group of people who have a shared interest or hobby with them. Maybe they do become a famous YouTuber. Who knows? It's possible. Think with your child about their hopes and aspirations and their aims for their life online. And instead of dismissing these things, maybe think about how they can take small steps towards being that person that they want to be. What would they need to do in order to increase the chances of this hope, this aspiration, this aim becoming a reality? Finally, remember that whatever your worries, you're not alone in them here, and that other families are facing them too. Talk to other families. Think about your hopes and your worries for your child online. You'll realise that you are far less alone in this than you think, and also then you'll suddenly have other people that you can begin to brainstorm this with. There aren't necessarily right and wrong answers, but we can be curious together. And when we're curious together, we're much more likely to come up with ideas that might work for our child. I really hope that you found this interesting and that there were some ideas here that you could take away. I've shared a lot of ideas in the last few minutes and don't feel like you have to do them all, but hopefully there was something here that you felt able to pick up and run with and to explore with your child. I think the key message I would want you to remember and to go away and really think about is that the online world can feel a bit alien and unusual and not something that we feel comfortable with to us. But to our children, it's a really, really important part of their life. And so we should be wondering about not always just what's the worst that could happen, but what's the best and what might be our role in helping that to happen.